Okay, so this is the 5th lesson in my series on piano for complete beginners. In lesson 4 we learned some useful stuff about how we notate things that usually happen in the left hand using the bass clef. We also learned about the C major scale, and right at the end of that lesson we were starting to play that scale with 2 hands together. Now in today's tutorial we're going to drag all of that stuff together and put it into practice with 2 short pieces of music for 2 hands. Okay, let's go. So what you need to do either now or after you've finished watching the tutorial once through is download the accompanying PDF that you'll find linked in the description text underneath this video. It contains the written music, the scores, to use a technical term, for 2 short pieces of music. Now in this lesson we're going to be doing pretty much nothing else except learning the first of those 2 pieces, okay? The second piece I'm going to kind of give you as a homework task. In each piece I've introduced just a couple of new ideas that we can talk about as we go along. Okay, let's start looking at piece number 1. As you can probably see from a quick glance, there are some things in here that we've seen before and some things that are just a little bit new. The new stuff is all to do with what we call the piece's dynamics, which is how loud or soft we're playing at any given moment. I'll talk about that in a second, but first let me play it through. I'll play it through once with the score up in screen and once in camera view like this so you can see my hands. Second time through when I'm playing in camera view, if you've already downloaded the score, you might like to follow along. Okay, let's just play it through once with the score up on the screen. Here we go. I'll take it fairly steadily but not too slowly. Okay, let's do it again and this time in camera view. So you might want to, when you're learning it yourself, you might want to wheel back a few times and just watch what I'm doing. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now we've had first sight of that score and we've heard what it sounds like and seen a little bit what it looks like to be played. Let's just spend a few minutes looking closely at what's going on. So here we are with the score up on the screen. Just ignore this green line here, that's the playhead in Sibelius, the application that I'm using here. That's got nothing to do with the score itself. So let's just take a look at this thing. Before we look at all this stuff with the dynamics, the louds and the softs, let's just check out that we understand everything that's going on here. First off, something that you might not have seen before is this wiggly line here. There's another one down here. It's called a brace. Okay, and it doesn't show that you need to do anything different. It's just used to show that these 2 staves, okay, and these 2 staves down here are being played on the same instrument. That might seem kind of superfluous, like duh, of course I'm playing them on the same piano, but it can be kind of useful when a piano part is written as part of a larger score, like in an orchestra, because it shows that both of these staves refer to the same instrument. Okay, so the brace here and here is kind of a hangover from that, and it's just considered good practice to write the braces in when you're writing piano score. Okay, so we have treble clef for right hand, bass clef for our left hand. It's worth just mentioning here that although right and left are usually notated with treble and bass clef, that's just because of where right hand and left hand parts typically tend to sit on the keyboard, okay? Sometimes you'll have a left hand pretty high up the keyboard, in which case it might be notated in the treble clef, or you might have a right hand that's fairly low down the piano keyboard, in which case it will be notated in bass clef. Don't worry about that for now though. Usually though it just works this way: treble bass, treble right, bass left. But just because you see a treble clef doesn't mean it should necessarily be played in the right hand. That refers to the area of the piano that the stave is covering, okay, not which hand you should be playing. Okay, right ahead of the clefs here at the start of the score, there. By the way, we would call these groups systems. Yeah, so this set of this first line of right and left is the first system. The second line of right and left is the second system, or the top system and the bottom system. Anyway, at the very start of the first system, at the very start of the score, we have the time signature, and it is our old friend 4/4. So we know we've got 4 beats in the bar, and each beat is a crotchet, a quarter note long. Okay, up here we've got a tempo marking, andante, which we've seen before and we know means at a walking pace. So not at all fast, but not too slow either. And here we've got the notes in the right and the left hands. Now we've got a mixture of crotchets. Okay, here are some crotchets, just playing them with Sibelius, and we've got some minims. Yeah. But we've also got a note that we haven't come across before. Right here at the start in the left, we have a semibreve, which if you're American you would call a whole note. Now just look at this for a second. Can you work out how long a semibreve lasts just by looking at the score? You can probably see that one semibreve lasts the full length of the bar in 4/4, which is 4 crotchets. So you can see it's worth 4 crotchets, 4 beats. It actually makes, it's one of these areas where it makes much more sense if you use the US system, yeah, because we call a crotchet a quarter note and a semibreve is a whole note, so it kind of makes sense, you know, 4 quarter notes make up 1 whole note, or 4 quarter notes make up 1 half note, a minim, and 2 half notes make up 1 whole note. Okay, so semibreves, whole notes are pretty straightforward. In 4/4 time, we're just holding them down for 4 beats, and in this piece it's usually the length of a whole bar. Now let's take a look at what each hand is doing. In the right, we've got something that looks like a melody. Okay, it's reasonably straightforward, and it's all taken from the C major scale. We might therefore say that this piece is in the key of C major, and we can confirm that because we can see that the last note is a C. Okay, we'll talk about key in a later tutorial, but just remember the term for now. Okay, the key of C major. I've also put in some fingering, yeah, in both the right and the left, yeah. But this is important, I haven't put fingering on every note. Now as a rule, composers or music editors will try not to clutter up a piano score with too much fingering, or too much of anything else in fact, yeah, because we want it to be nice and clear and readable. So what we've got here is kind of an outline of the fingering, but with most of the really obvious stuff missed out. Yeah, I've still, you know, marked it in pretty heavily, but if you're, for example, playing that F with your thumb and that C with your fifth, it's pretty obvious that the fingers you'll use here will be 2, 3 and 4. Okay. Yeah, okay. As you've probably noticed by now, by the way, in the treble clef we tend to write the fingering above the stave, and in the bass clef we tend to write it below the stave. Okay, that isn't a hard and fast rule, but it's what tends to happen. Yeah. And again, the reason for that above and below is because we don't want to take up too much space between the staves either, which we need for other stuff. For a start, we've got this legato marking, so we know we're going to be playing smoothly. Yeah, legato is so common, it isn't always marked unless the composer really wants to stress legato playing. It's kind of assumed that most piano music will be played legato unless otherwise stated. But the things I really want you to look at here are the dynamic markings, which are these letters, MP at the beginning and end, and the MF here, okay? And also this funny thing here, which we call a hairpin, yeah? Because it looks like a hairpin, okay? Yeah, we'll come to that in a second. Now, when I was playing through earlier, you might have noticed that sometimes I was playing quite softly and sometimes a bit louder. And that's because I was following these dynamic markings. Let's just look at what they mean. Now the piece starts MP, which means moderately soft. Okay, mezzo piano in Italian, don't need to worry about that. Moderately soft. Again, these things are kind of subjective. It's like the andante. It's not hard and fast, tempo marking there saying, you must play at 80 beats a minute. Rather, it is quite subjective. It allows you a lot of latitude in interpretation, which is really important because, this is about being musical. You've got to kind of interpret it for yourself. So MP means basically quiet but not too quiet. And as you can see, all of the first 4 bars are MP, moderately soft. Now then, starting in bar 5, and look, we've even got a bar number up here, where MF, mezzo forte, which means moderately loud. So again, we're not going overboard, not too loud, but a bit louder than we were when we were playing MP. Then at the start of bar 6, we run into the hairpin. What does that mean? Now, basically, it tells us to at the start of bar 7, it tells us to steadily get quieter throughout bar 7. Okay, so we're starting MF here, and we're going back down to MP, to moderately soft. Now a hairpin can go either way. If it starts wide and gets narrower, it means get softer, and if it's the other way round, it starts narrow and it gets wider, it means get louder. Okay, the important thing is and this is really critical, that it's gradual, and the length of the hairpin shows us how quickly we should get louder or softer. So in bar 7, ideally, and this is what I tried to do when I played through, each one of those notes above the hairpin, should get just a little bit softer than the one before it, until this note in bar 8, this C, is back down to being MP, the same volume roughly as at the start of the piece. Okay, as I said, important point, nobody pretends this is an exact science. So, don't go downloading a decibel measuring app and checking that you're playing at exactly the same volume for every MP note and all the rest. This sounds kind of wishy-washy, but dynamic markings are something that you should judge very subjectively. Judge it by how it sounds to you and how it feels. Now, in this week's PDF on the 3rd page, I've included a list of some of the most common dynamic markings, so make sure you check those out and learn them, because they will come in really handy. Another thing I want you to do with this short piece is listen to yourself playing it. That sounds kind of mad, but when we're playing the piano, it's very easy, and I've said this loads of times in the past in other tutorials, it's very easy to get so focused on pushing the right key at the right time, that we forget to listen to ourselves. That's bad because it kind of breaks the feedback loop between ear and fingers. It means we risk ending up with performances that are kind of, technically correct, but which lack any expression. So listen carefully to what you're playing, and even though it's a really simple piece, try if you can to give it a little bit of expression. Make it musical if you like. After all, that's a whole point of doing this stuff. Now, after you've worked on that piece, which, obviously I've played through for you, I've got a little bit of homework for you to do before the next session. It's that second piece of music, also in the PDF. You'll find it on the 2nd page. And this one, I'm not going to play through for you or explain, at least not yet. Your job is to work it out for yourself. Then I'll play it through at the start of the next lesson and you can see how you've done. I've included a couple of explanatory notes in there just to help you along. Now, as well as learning that unseen piece, I want you to keep practicing the first piece. Okay, you're aiming to have it really accurate and to play it to a steady beat. That's really important. Don't speed up for the easy bits and slow down for the hard bits. And this is really important, I also want you to keep working on the various versions of the scale of C major that we learned in lesson 4, the previous lesson. Okay, so there we go. That should be enough to keep you going for now. I hope you're finding the course useful so far. If you are, please do consider supporting my crowdfunding project at www.patreon.com/BillHilton, if only to the tune of $1 or $2 per tutorial I post. Remember to subscribe to my channel using the little red subscribe button down here in the bottom right, like my Facebook page and follow me on Twitter, the links are below. And above all, practice, 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 so that when we get into the next lesson, when we're going to look at another new piece and some different types of notes and scales, you've got the stuff we've learned so far down really well. See you next time.